Okay, hi everyone. I'm Jeremy Stone. I'm the Asia Resilience Director for Mercy Corps. I'm based here in Yangon in Myanmar, but I support the whole Asia region on resilience, climate change, and disaster risk reduction programming. So at this point, nearly all of our countries are now in a level or 2 or 3 for this COVID crisis. This means that almost all of us are now working from home. It means that our access to communities is severely limited, and many of our field teams are either returning to their homes or working in very restrictive conditions in their field offices. So this means that we're really at the minute unable to travel to meet with our project communities and project participants. We're really going to struggle to provide direct face-to-face support in this period. And as the COVID virus spreads, we're really going to need to be able to think about how to disseminate awareness messaging on a very wide scale. So really promoting protective measures, really thinking about promotion of hygiene and hand washing, but also thinking about how these communities can access water and hygiene kits and materials in this very critical period. So in terms of how do we adapt to this new reality? So our teams, our national staff are adjusting to working from home and communicating remotely between teams and with our partners. This isn't always easy to do, especially when you don't have good internet connection in your home. If you've got children and relatives to take care of, often you can be in a very small space within your home. However, we have got some of the most resilient and adaptable team members you could wish for, and they are doing a fantastic job under these very extreme conditions. So the implications for our project communities and participants is a bit more complicated. Many of our communities that we work with are very reliant on agriculture, on informal businesses to make their livelihoods. So social distancing is not possible for everyone. When it is being enforced by national states of emergencies, these can have really considerable impacts on our communities. Our farmers are not able to go out and work in the fields. They're not able to harvest agricultural products, either for subsistence, for food for themselves, or to sell to markets to be able to generate income. So in a number of our countries, including Myanmar and Nepal, we're about to head into the rainy season in a couple of months' time. This is the peak agricultural season for many significant crops such as rice in this region. So we're very closely monitoring how COVID is going to impact on communities. How is it going to affect market systems? Are markets going to be able to function in these times of shutdown? And so we're also using this period when we're sort of locked down to really adapt how we coordinate with our partner agencies, how do we work with local governments remotely, and how do we plan and prepare to deliver critical services such as food and hygiene equipment in these times. So how does climate change impact on COVID response? I would actually maybe flip that question and say, how is climate change going to exacerbate the impacts of climate change and natural disasters? COVID does not replace other shocks and stresses such as climate and disaster impacts, but it is going to have a significant exacerbation of those impacts. But it also really is going to change the way that we prepare and respond to other shocks and stresses, because you're going to be experiencing multiple shocks and stresses at one time, so they're going to be layered. So, in a number of Asian countries, we're currently in the dry season. We're already experiencing climate change impacts, drought, and significant water scarcity. And this is at a time when we need even more water and access to water for improved hygiene practices, especially for washing hands. We need access to water points and basins in our communities. So where does this water come from when you're already experiencing, water scarcity from climate impacts? So this is going to be soon followed in a couple of months' time in a lot of countries by the Asian monsoon season. And a lot of our communities during this period are going to experience regular floods. We have annual flooding events across this region. This is a point where we really need to think about where do communities go? There's a lot of forced displacement that happens during these periods. There's a lot of other events such as landslides, disruption to transportation networks, etc. So we're working with local governments, with other development partners to review our flood contingency plans, thinking about like evacuation plans, thinking about where do people go to shelter during these other extreme events, and thinking about how can we adapt these plans to potential cases of COVID. And we've experienced in some countries like Indonesia where actually the shelter points are in hospitals. So we're obviously going to have to review where people go and how do we really promote social distancing and prevention of spread and transmission of this virus when there's pretty significant displacement and movement of communities. So I guess another point is that we're really reviewing the economic impacts of COVID. We're seeing how can we provide better information to farmers, both around COVID itself, but also around climate change impacts, so that farmers can make more appropriate plans about harvesting, about the ability to sell crops to markets. And so where there's going to be complete disruption, and this is not going to be possible, this is where we're really looking and pre-positioning our work to really do kind of emergency food and cash distribution, and very consciously thinking about how do we prevent any further transmission and spread of this virus. So, I mean, I guess overall, this is a pretty unprecedented situation for all of us. For someone who spent the last 12 years or so working to really encourage communities, governments, and businesses to better prepare for climate change and natural disasters and shocks and stresses. I really hope we can learn from this global pandemic to really review how do we invest in preparation for shocks and stresses. Climate change and disaster impacts are going to continue to escalate even in the face of a global health disaster. So let's take this as an opportunity to really change perspectives, change behaviors about how do we plan and prepare in advance for these crises and extreme events. So thank you.